In this video, we'll learn about sketch parameters. After completing this step, you'll be able to create a sketch and create sketch parameters. In Fusion 360, we're going to start with a new untitled document. We're going to validate that our document settings are metric, and we're going to begin talking about the process of creating what are called user parameters. We're going to go to our Modify dropdown, and we want to select Change Parameters. Parameters will help us predefine critical elements of a design. We have favorites, user parameters, and model parameters. Because this is a new design, there aren't any model parameters created yet. But we're going to begin the process by hitting the plus icon next to user parameter. The first thing that we want to do is we want to enter a name base width. Noting that there's no space between the E and the W, we simply capitalize the W. The units are going to be millimeters, and the expression is going to be 100. We'll say OK, and now we've created a base width. We're going to repeat this process, and this time we're going to create a base length. This value is going to be 50 millimeters, and we're going to say OK. And lastly, we want to create one more called base thickness. The base thickness is going to be 25. It's important to note that the units are a critical aspect. If you have something like a number of instances for a pattern, that's going to be no units. If you have something that ends up being an angle, you need to make sure that it's radians, degrees, or grad. You also notice that there are many other different types of instances of different units here, so make sure that you are creating the correct unit. For us, millimeters is going to work for all three of those. Next, we're going to create a new sketch, and we're simply going to select the top plane or the XY plane. We're going to go to our 2-point rectangle tool, but then we want to change to a center rectangle, placing the center point at the origin and begin dragging out. Notice that with the dimension highlighted, I'm going to begin typing. In this case, I'm going to hit B on the keyboard, and then I can manually go through each of the common parameters that we've already created. We've got base length, base width, and base thickness. I'm going to hit base length, I'm going to hit tab, and I'm going to hit B again for base width. Notice the orientation of these two values, and notice that now they're displayed here and FX is next to them. I'm going to hit enter on the keyboard, and now I've created a new rectangle using those two values. If we wanted to change the orientation of this, we can modify the dimensions themselves, or we can delete this constraint by selecting it, hitting delete, and we can rotate the entire rectangle until we get to a position where one of the edges is closer to vertical or horizontal, and we can reapply that constraint. I'm going to hit escape to get off my constraint tool, finish the sketch, and go to create extrude. I'm going to begin dragging this up and noting the dimension changes, but in this case, I want to make it the base thickness. So I'm going to start typing the letter B and go to base thickness and hit enter. Now we've created a fully defined solid body that's based on parameters that are in our user parameters. If we go to modify and we change those, we can bring this down and we can modify these values. For example, changing the 100 to 150 is going to update the design. I'm going to reduce this back down to 100, and then I want to OK this dialog. Next, I'm going to select the top face using the left click. Then I want to right click to create a new sketch. I'm going to create a center diameter circle, placing it at the origin and giving it a manual value of 25 millimeters and hitting enter. I'm going to finish the sketch. Once again, go to create extrude, select that area and begin dragging it down a distance of -5 millimeters, allowing it to cut through the solid body and saying OK. Now let's go back to modify and change parameters. Let's expand the model parameters and notice now that we have sketch 1, extrude 1, and sketch 2 and extrude 2. If we expand each of these, you'll notice that the linear dimensions from sketch 1 are linked to the expression base length and base width. If we minimize that and expand extrude 1, you'll notice that the base thickness is in here, and even though we didn't define a taper angle, it's coming up at 0 degrees, which is a manually entered value. If we go to sketch 2, we manually entered the value of 25 millimeters, so there's no expression that's linked here. And if we go to extrude to, you'll notice that its along distance is -5 millimeters, and again, the taper angle is 0. So these values are all manually entered values. They don't have any user parameters associated with them. However, we can create those user parameters even after the fact. So I'm going to simply put die circle, and then I'm going to enter a value of 25 and say OK. Now I've got that new named expression. I can come down into the dimension of that diameter, and I can begin typing that in, and I can link it to that value. So I'm going to minimize this a little bit so I can drag it out of the way, and I'm going to modify my user parameter. Making it 35 now increases or decreases that size. It doesn't have to be a user parameter to have that functionality. For example, the extrude of -5, if I make that -10, notice that now it's going deeper into the part. However, if I make that a positive value, it goes away because it's still trying to create an extrude cut. It's not trying to remove material. So it's important to note that there is a limitation to how much we can change these values. It's not going to automatically go from a cut to a join simply because we changed the negative to a positive. With those limitations in mind, this is a great chance for you to play around with creating those parameters on basic designs before moving on to the next step. And as always, make sure that you do save. I'm going to create a new design called Model Practice. And note that I'm putting it inside of a subfolder I created called Modeling. If you want to create subfolders on the fly when you're saving your design, you can always use this drop-down arrow, which will expand the projects and allow you to create new projects or new folders directly inside of here. I'm going to put it in my modeling subfolder and select save before moving on.